Hi everyone, this is Lauren, your sewing buddy, and welcome back to my historical Halloween project. The project itself is a vintage street light, street signal costume from Walden's Fancy Dress Costumes. I don't know the exact year, but once again, fancy dress costumes from any vintage source, you need to be careful about appropriation and cultural sensitivity and things like that. So I'm going to mention that in every single video. It's important. What I'm doing today is trying to figure out the sleeves. So I'm hoping I can take the miscut piece from the bodice and use that as one of the layers of sleeves. First, I have to figure out exactly how wide my sleeves need to be. So I'm going to take my tape measure and start at a seam and just work my way all the way around the armhole. Ideally, the result of these sleeves is it's going to look like the hooded part sort of at the top of each light in a signal light. So I think that'll be really cool. I just have to make sure they can stand up on their own. So yeah, start at a seam, keep everything nice and flush, and make sure that your tape measure doesn't wiggle around. Yes, it would be easier if I had measured it while it was flat or while I was cutting it, but this way still works out, I think. So now that I know the width I need, I can take some cat hair off of there. I own many lint rollers, don't worry. Let's see if I have enough here. I do not. Not at all. Okay. Plan B, which is see if I have enough anywhere in this cabbage really to make this work. It's just a matter of finding the right straight angles to get the cut I need, which is about 22 inches, so that's not gonna work. Try it down here maybe, or just toss it all away because I have enough black linen that we can just use that instead. That's the same stuff I used for the facing. I know I have plenty. Why am I making this more difficult on myself? Because I wanted to keep the fabrics on the outside the same, but this is close enough. It'll work, I promise. So make sure I've got that laid out nice and flat. Make sure I've got the width I need. Not quite there, but if I go to where it's uncut, yes, perfect. Okay. Let's do this. So now I just need to make sure that we've got the width. I'm going to draw out the basic sleeve shape. Make sure that end is folded or unfolded from under the rest of it. Actually, just need to lay this whole darn thing out flat, and I'm going to fold it in quarters so I can cut out all 4 sleeves at once, because these are going to be 2 layered just for the stability, so I can use interfacing and make sure they keep that nice shape. And I'm not doing the straightest lines on this. I'm not being too precious about this. It's Halloween. It's fine. So half of what I need for the full circumference, plus a little bit more for seam while I do math in my head. And okay, right there. So make a mark there, draw a line up from that, and for the underarm, it's a 1/2 inch seam on each side, so I want to do 1 inch between, so 2 inches total. Easy enough. There we go. And then from there, I need to figure out exactly how tall I want it to be. So let's see if I can do a rough guesstimate. No, better to measure it on the shoulder itself. That way I know how far it's going to stick out. I know about where the shoulder seam on the dress should be. So once again, adding 4 seams, and then just roughly sketch out a shape, and it should be good. Doing all four at once means that there's no, the sleeves aren't going to be a little bit off from each other. It's all just going to be really nice. I'm also going to cut the seam on the underarm at a bit of an angle. That way it's going to stand up a little bit more, I hope. It's kind of experimental. We'll see how it turns out. And then just roughly draw the shape here for the curve, and then I think we are good to go. I've still, unfortunately, not found my nice black fabric shears, so I've still got my old, I forget the brand name, silver fabric shears that have been used for paper and hair and other things that fabric shears should not be used for unless they're being retired, which these technically have been. But I cut down that middle seam there to make sure I had 4 pieces instead of just 2, and then just roughly following my lines. Again, I'm not being fussy about it. That's what seams are for. I'm much better at doing clean lines for a seam than I am for cutting and drawing, so it all gets cleaned up in post. I did a little bit of a straight cut down at the bottom because I know that part's going to be turned up under, so that way it lays flat, I think. We'll see. But I've got all 4 sleeves cut out in one fell swoop. So next is interfacing. So again, I want these to be very sturdy looking, very sharp, round shapes. So I'm going to trace this out with just a basic mechanical pencil, because the nice thing about interfacing is it'll take pencil, pen, it's basically paper, but a little bit like fabric. And yes, it is fusible interfacing. I apologize to the greater costuming community. I prefer to work with fusible just because then I know it's stuck exactly where I put it. And once I got that all traced out, I'm going to measure in 1/2 inch from the lines I drew. That's my usual seam allowance for everything. And I don't want this to be bulky in the seams, so the interfacing is basically going to sit inside all of the seam lines, and that way all I have to worry about within the seams is the fabric itself. So I'm just following, trying to make sure that the 1 inch mark is as parallel to the line itself as I can make it. That way I know it's as close to a 1/2 inch as it can be. And sorry, it's a little bit out of frame there, but yeah, it's sort of, no, it is literally taking out the seam allowance from a pattern piece. When cutting out fashion fabric, you would do exactly the opposite with most good patterns that don't already have the seam allowance worked in. So here you see I'm going at a little bit of an angle to measure out that curve. I'm sure there is a faster, better way to do this, but this works for me. And if you have other alternatives, then I would be happy to hear it. But this just gives me a nice shape that I can then trace. Make sure everything is flat once again, and yeah, just draw in that slightly smaller, thinner shape. Another good reason to do it this way with the seam allowance cut out is because there's less chance of a little bit overhanging when you press it, because then that fusible interfacing can get on your iron or on your ironing board, and it's just a terrible mess, and no one is happy with that. And if I were smart, I would have folded the interfacing in fourths and also cut out all 4 at the same time, but I was not smart this day, so I'm going to have to use this piece I'm cutting right now to trace out a second piece, because I do in fact have 2 sleeves on the dress. So make sure everything is lined up really well. Again, I'm not being super careful, especially with this because it's not at all visible. It's just there for structure. And as long as it all sits within the lines of the fabric, then there's no worries about being a little bit off. If anything, it's by a millimeter or two. The non-fusible side of fusible interfacing really likes to stick to itself, so it's really easy to do something like this, whereas with, say, satin, this would be a nightmare and you'd have to pin into the underlayer and the overlayer, and it would be slipping and sliding everywhere. But at least I don't have to measure out the seam allowance again, and I can just cut out this piece and double check some things. And make sure I cut off that bottom edge because if that's still on there, then it's going to be way too thick. So, almost done. There we go. Get rid of the interfacing cabbage. Interfacing, though, you can keep little scraps of, but oh, let me get that in frame for you, though. Sorry about that. There we go. So you see it lays nicely inside the boundaries of the fabric, and no, it's not perfectly straight. But I have sewn it in, so here you see I've got the interfacing pressed on, and I have my outer layer, and I've done an understitch along the edge there to make sure I get that nice sharp edge, clip my curve, and now it's just a matter of attaching it to the bodice itself. Oh, and for the underarm seam, I just did like you would a shoulder seam, just straight across both pieces, as if they were one. And then for the sturdiness of it, a little bit of finagling. It'll be better once my shoulder's in there and it's on the dress, but check that out. I mean, glorious. Perfect. Nice sturdy hood. So to get it onto the bodice, I'm going to do right sides together. Just have to make sure I know which sides are the right sides, which I want the side without the interfacing to be on top. And so I just need to flip it like that. And start at the shoulder seam. And everything will be good. Except I should probably make sure that I know where the center point on this fabric is before I pin. If I were starting at the bottom, it would be easy, but because I'm starting at the top, for some reason, I just grab that bottom seam, grab up toward the top, see where it folds in half, and that's my center point. So then that I can pin onto the top shoulder seam, and that'll give me a nice balance on front and back. And as I'm pinning this, I'm going to be folding the lining layer down so it stays out of the way. And then I also need to make sure that that raw edge of the facing and the outer layer are all lined up. Keep everything nice and flush. I don't know if I've told you about my pincushion before, but it's not actually a pincushion, it's a pattern weight. So she's full of sand, not sawdust. But that was one of the volunteer gifts at Costume College one year. Came with some other sewing things, but then once I decided I needed to tear my pincushion apart and reclaim all of the sewing needles that had been lost inside of it, she became the pincushion for me. I'm still looking for a new pincushion, but I want to get something really cute, and nothing that I can find really is cute, so she works for now. Not very stable on the bottom, but you know, maybe I knock her off the couch arm a couple of times in a project. That's fine. But yeah, just working my way around all of this, making sure everything matches up nicely, stays flush, trying to match up that bottom seam with the underarm seam, and let's see how... Oh, it's starting to look like I might have cut the sleeve a little bit too big, but I won't know till I get both sides pinned down. So I'm going to start back up at the top and work at pinning all of that in. Maybe I'm using more pins than I need to. That's just the person that I am. I do my pins sideways like this because it's a lot easier to pull them out in the machine. I know exactly where the ends are. It's less likely that if I accidentally sew too far, then the pin is going to get caught in the workings of the machine. I have had pins in the past go into the feed dogs and get stuck and jammed, and then I have to take the machine apart and get some pliers and pry them out. So yeah, I did cut that sleeve too big. So luckily this fabric does have some sideways stretch, so let's work our way back around and see if maybe I can salvage this without having to go back to my sewing machine. I'm going to speed this up for you a little bit here, just because it's a lot of pinning. Essentially what I'm doing is stretching out the bodice fabric as far as it'll go, and then I'm being very gentle with the sleeve fabric. That way I can eat up as much of that extra sleeve fabric as I can. I don't know if it's going to do much. Where it has the facing, the bodice just doesn't stretch because that's the linen, that's thicker, it doesn't give, and that's part of the point of it. But just working my way around, hoping and praying, and I realize that this is a lot more work than just, you know, going back to the sewing machine and taking it in some. But I am stubborn and don't like to admit when I've made mistakes. So this is the extra work that we make for ourselves when we won't admit it. But now that I know that I need about 3/4 inch off each end, so 1.5 inches total, I can get that unpinned. And then I just have to mark out that 3/4 inch. I'm going to mark this out from the stitch line as opposed to from the edge of the fabric, because I know, like I said, my stitch lines are a lot cleaner than my cut lines, and the edge has frayed some. This way I have a new stitch line to follow, and I can just cut off a little bit, leaving a little bit extra so that I have fabric to sew into. And I'm actually going to fold this in half this time, which is something I didn't do with the original cut. That way it's going to be nice and symmetrical on both sides. And then with that done, time to sew. And here I have both sleeves pinned on. I've made the necessary corrections, and you can see that they both do in fact fit into the armholes now. No extra fabric to be seen. And then once again, we're just turning the interfacing away from that edge that we're going to be sewing. We don't want any of the lining fabric in there at all right now. And that's actually kind of a cool look, a little bit Blade Runner, maybe inspiration for a future vest or something. And after a brief sewing trip, we've now got that attached on the outside. So we're going to turn the lining to the inside and then start folding it over, which I've got that nice guideline from the interfacing to follow. So just fold over where the interfacing starts and then line it up a little bit overlapping the stitching, but not by too much. And there's a brief debate here about whether I'll be hand sewing or machine sewing, because that dictates which way the pins go. And I have decided to hand sew this edge. Yes, it's a lot more work, but I don't want the sewing to be visible on the front, which I know it would be black on black. It wouldn't really show up that much. It's Halloween, it's okay. Not like I'm going anywhere for Halloween anyway, but I would know, and it hurts my art heart. So this will be hand sewn. That does mean next week will be another stitch and chat with me. So more updates on life, the universe, and everything. But yeah, you just want to make sure that the sleeve itself is very flat. Because I'm working where that facing layer is now, I need to make sure that that's also laying flat. Although it is tucked in, or locked in rather, where we sewed the armhole, but just to make sure everything is playing along nicely. Because again, it's all about that nice crisp edge and that nice round shape. Because that is, like, I didn't actually realize until today that that's what the sleeves were supposed to look like. The hood on the upper part of each light, which maybe you haven't noticed before, but if you stop and look at a stoplight, the red, yellow, and green each has one of those. Now I've almost made it all the way around, just a couple more pins to go. Make sure everything is going to stay nicely in place, and flip it out to see how it's gonna look. And my god, check that out. Look how sharp and round and stiff that is. That's exactly what I was going for. Excellent. So now I just need to do the same to the other side. And I am not going to make you sit through that with me, though. I'm actually at this point going to say that I thank you for joining me for this. And if you haven't already, please like, comment, subscribe, share this video with your friends. I am trying to put out videos every Friday. So far, so good. And the big reveal for this project should be out on October 30th. We've still got a couple more videos to go before then, so don't worry. I'll still be here keeping you company while you work on your creative pursuits. And as always, please go create a beautiful thing until I see you again.